what should people be eating?
So I
And
think that,
why?
yeah, the
It's
one
the
thing that we
science.
learned when we were writing this book, we contacted Jerry Pollack,
Yeah,
who is the water expert. And Jerry is the one who has revealed how water structures itself against a hydrophilic surface. And our bodies are full of these hydrophilic surfaces, cell membranes, tissue membranes, and so forth. And the water structures itself against these surfaces, sometimes only 5 or 6 atoms thick. But these structures, the structured water is like a wire. It's conducting electricity, it's conducting information, and our whole bodies are like a fine mesh of wires because of the structure of the water. So the question is, how do we get really robust, strong hydrophilic surfaces, smooth hydrophilic surfaces? And I come back to my favorite subject, which is saturated fat. So the saturated fats, they pack together, because they're straight, they pack together like logs, and they create the really nice impermeable cell membranes, impermeable unless you've got some kind of channel there or something, and good, strong hydrophilic surfaces. So that it's like having really good insulation on your wiring. And that's what we need in this age of just electrosmog. We're just surrounded by, think of like living in a trash dump.
yeah.
That's what our air is like, with all this, you know.
So in other words, would you say it's accurate to say it's a bit like a copper wire, that everybody knows that if you have an exposed copper wire, first of all, it's not safe, and you're really asking for trouble.
And it shorts out, and the electricity gets wasted, really.
Wasted, and it's very inefficient. So anybody who makes wiring puts a very robust layer of essentially rubber tubing around the copper wire.
Right.
And essentially what you're saying is the saturated fat is the rubber tubing.
Yes, yes, it acts like the rubber tubing.
And the copper wire is more like the coherent water structure, which then, because it's protected and coherent and safe, it's allowed to essentially become the electrical system of the body.
And it's not easily disrupted. And so what's been going on for the last 120 years, or 100 years, let's put it like that, we have been told over and over not to eat saturated fats, to eat the industrial seed oils, which are highly unsaturated. And I remember Mary Enig saying to me, these seed oils, what they do is you end up with floppy cell membranes. And so they are permeable. They let stuff through that shouldn't be let through. They just don't work. The cell membranes don't work. And she said, who knows what the effects of this will be? Well, I think we can very well postulate that the effects will be a lot of sensitivity to electricity and to dirty electricity and to electromagnetic frequencies and so forth.
As well as other toxins, I'm sure.
Oh, yes, because those membranes are there to keep stuff out, keep a different electric potential on either side. They're kind of the architecture of our tissues.
Right. So essentially the tissue, I think we made the point that, a lens in the eye, it's based on the function, which is to be transparent to light. So that's a certain, the membrane or the cholesterol and the proteins, they organize the water to be transparent in that case.
Yes, in other cases,
like the liver, they create a different structure because a different function is needed.
And you mentioned cholesterol. So along with saturated fats, the cholesterol is very important in keeping those cell membranes waterproof, right, and robust and secure.
It's interesting too. I'm sure you remember Ufi Ravenskoff, and one of the things he wrote about was the protective effect of LDL on what he called infections or microorganisms.
Yes, yes.
A lot of times when I read it prevents you against infections, how I translate that myself into saying it protects you against toxicity, which then becomes an infection.
And he actually used the word endotoxins.
Uh,
He actually didn't say it protects you against bacteria or microbes. He says it protects you against the endotoxins that are produced by these microbes.
so a strategy of lowering your LDL, which is essentially, like a vegan diet and statin drugs, is a strategy to make you more susceptible to quote infections, which means really toxicity and
Yes.
endotoxins.
Yes, exactly.
And that's
It's interesting that the first symptoms of this disease are flu-like symptoms, a dry throat, fever, which that's what toxins do to you. And
yeah.
you start to have a fever. And then it's very interesting that this disease is characterized by widespread clotting in the body. Apparently, the iron, and wouldn't iron be disrupted by electromagnetic fields? Of course it would be. It seems to be pulled out of the hemoglobin, and the hemoglobin travels through the arteries, but it's not delivering oxygen anymore.
Right.
And at the same time, you have a lot of free iron, and free iron, as we know, is extremely toxic and does all sorts of terrible things, especially in the lungs where this is happening. And one of the scariest things is the autopsies of the people who definitely had this disease. They don't even look like lungs anymore. They're so disrupted.
Right. So this free iron might be causing or be part of the reason for this hyperinflammatory destruction of the tissue then.
Yeah. And I think it's very interesting that so many of these patients report a fizzy feeling, like you've touched an electric wire or something.
Right. All right. So we've got raw milk butter, grass-fed butter, lard. What else should we be eating?
Well, I also talk about broth, because broth, of course, gives us a lot of glycine. And I did ask Stephanie Senoff about this, who's written about the detrimental effects of glycine, because the glyphosate gets into the tissues that have glycine in them and replaces it. And there's some very important lung surfactants that contain glycine, and the glyphosate will get in there and then they won't work. And I said, what is the best protection against glyphosate? And she says, lots of broth, lots of broth.
Wow.
So you have plenty of glycine. So if it does get disrupted, there's more that you can bring in. And of course, broth is our best source of glycine.
So just to get very practical about it, do you see any reason to do fish broth or chicken broth or beef broth or pork broth, or does it just matter the quality of the animal and the amount of gelatin in it?
I think basically it probably doesn't matter unless you are treating a thyroid condition. And then I would say the fish broth is absolutely the very best thing for you. But I think any kind of broth, it's all glycine, no matter what animal it is. And the quality of the animal is extremely important, because if that animal's been eating, genetically modified feed full of glyphosate, then that'll be there. And you don't want to be taking in even more with your broth. So, and I think you said we wanted to touch on how to protect yourself, what to stockpile if you have, if we're going to have food shortages. And I think number one is to make that food chain as short as possible. So, and we said in the book, everybody should have a farmer or have a farm. Doesn't mean you need to own a farm or married to the farmer, but you need to have a farm or farmer close by where you can get a lot of your food.
All right, so fats, we've got broth. So how about organ meats? So, you could make the case that organ meats are maybe the most nutritious, highest in vitamin A, but they also have a lot of iron. And so is there a downside, or is that just fine for everybody? Or are there some people who should or shouldn't eat it, or what would you have to say about
Well,
that?
I would really say we need to eat liver a couple times a week, one way or another. You've got to figure out how to get liver in you, because liver is the A, the D. If it's poultry liver, it's the best source of K. It's your iron, it's B6, B12, all the minerals. I mean, liver is a sacred food, and it's a highly protective food for your immune system, whatever that may be. And so my preference is chicken liver pate, but it can be beef liver, liver and onions. It can be desiccated liver, it can be liverwurst. And the Europeans are much more clever at making offal taste good than we are.
Yeah.
We can't really get liver sausage here, or sausage with liver in it. But
Are there other organ meats that people should try to eat, or is it just
well,